Hello and welcome to the special series of ETCFO.com on the budget 2025. Every year we conduct a special series trying to understand, decode from the industry experts in terms of what are they expecting from the union budget, and more importantly, what is it that the industry needs specifically at this point of time. My name is Amol Dete and I'm heading ETPS, BFSI and ETCFO.com, dedicated news portals of the Economic Times. And this is our second show of Budget 2025 on the ETCFO.com. Earlier, we did a similar show on the ETBFSI.com. So, friends, I'm glad to introduce my panel with you. My first speaker for this particular session is Ms. Niranjani, the CFO of the Hershey's and Company. Niranjani, glad to have you.
Thank you, Amol.
My
Thanks for having me.
speaker is Mr. Aniket Talati, who is the former president of ICI and a veteran CA. Aniket, glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Next speaker is Mr. Kunal Kumar Kundu, the economist of Societe Generale. Kunal, glad to have you.
Thanks, Amol. It's been a pleasure here. Yeah.
Thank you. Another next panelist is from a quick commerce company or e-commerce company called Zepto, Mr. Ramesh Bafna. Ramesh ji, glad to have you.
Pleasure.
My next CFO who's joining me for this discussion is, Miss Ramni Dathi, CFO of Team List Services. Ramni, glad to have you.
Thank you, Amol.
So, lots of questions I have specifically for you, and everyone has a lot of expectations from the finance minister. What we will get after 21 days, obviously, we will wait and watch for that. But there are no harm in sharing our expectations and, more importantly, discussing the pain points and the major challenges that the industry is going through. Because at one side, when you're talking about doubling down the economy, moving ahead from $5 trillion to even $10 trillion economy and Viksit Bharat, we have to also see whether there is a roadmap that the government has provided or what kind of roadmap that the government should provide specifically in the coming budget. So let me begin by asking you a very basic and a specific question to all of you, which is, what are your expectations from the finance minister? What would you like to see finance minister unveiling and unleashing in the budget document on the 1st of February, considering your background, your industry? And maybe, Aniket, I will start with you.
Well, thank you, Awolji. And I think, like you said, it's going to be unraveled only 21 days from now. We can only sit and crystal gaze of what the budget might have in store. But I think very important that this is going to be the first full year budget of this term of the Honorable Prime Minister and this new government. And I think, therefore, what we saw in July was only a stopgap in a certain sense, that you were trying to fill in the gaps to make sure that the financial year was set. We had a vote on account in February, and then again, the July budget, which set the year's financial numbers into order. What I would typically say in terms of the expectations from the budget, Amolji, what we have seen over the past few years is that the government has not been very aggressive in terms of coming up with many surprises in the budget. I think what has been one hallmark of the Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala ji is she has been consistent in terms of whatever she's doing. There is a method to whatever gets unraveled, and it's slow paced. Not something which earlier we were used to, when every year the slabs would change. We would see changes in personal income taxes, exemptions coming in. Though I think this July budget, we saw some major changes in terms of now employee-linked schemes and incentives being rolled out to corporates, which was never heard of. We had PLIs, which have been successfully implemented, but I think now we have ELIs, or employment-linked incentives. But one thing that I can tell you what I expect from this budget is I don't want to see any more surprises, especially on the capital markets front. There's an age-old English saying, it says, why fix it when it ain't broken? Something that's doing well, I think, especially the capital markets. We're seeing a lot of growth. We're seeing a lot of people making actual money out of the capital markets. And I think we've already moved the corner there in terms of having a higher capital gain tax and also changing the period of holdings. Where now I think 12.5% seems to be a good place for where we are, and therefore I would hope that doesn't get tinkered with. At the same time, some benefit to the salaried classes is what I'm expecting, because it couldn't be done in the previous budget, but this is a full year budget, and therefore I am hoping some tinkering to happen, especially in the exemptions, and that would obviously be a huge relief to the middle class and also for the salaried class. So yeah, those are, I think, my 30,000 feet kind of expectations that I would have from the budget, and we'll deep dive with you as we
Sure,
move
I
forward.
think meaningful one, Aniket. Thanks for sharing that. Let me move ahead and bring Niranjani here. Niranjani.
Sure, Mol. I think for us, I think very clearly domestic consumption is extremely key, and that's the cornerstone of our economic growth. So I think a lot of eyes on that consumption, domestic consumption, as a how it's going to evolve. If you see the last few quarters, how things have moved, I think rural demand has kind of picked up thanks to all the benefit schemes and investment in rural infrastructure. However, urban demand is still requiring some spur. So I think there are two ways to really handle it. One, of course, is India Inc. coming up with more innovative products which can really meet the unmet needs of consumers. There's clearly some work to be done from, I guess, all of us here. But at the same time, I think government can really step in and put, like how Aniket said, more disposable income in the hands of the consumer through different levers that it can touch, be it improved employment opportunities or expanding tax base and thereby reducing personal taxation for the middle class. So there's clearly some expectation out there from the FM this round, and I think that should come in to really help us push back on the accelerator to step our urban growths, which has been tapering for a while now. The second theme for me would be clearly continued rigorous focus on improving ease of doing business, because we have got a few green shoots. We've moved a few notches up in that direction. But having said that, there's still a lot of room for us to really improve and become, like, say, the top 10 most favored nation kind of status, right? So there's still some work to be done in that space. And last but not the least, I think the Honorable Prime Minister clearly spoke about Viksit Bharat as our new dream go place in 2047. And so kind of breaking that to say, how do we really inch up to that 8% GDP growth that we are used to in the last couple of years? How do we kind of back there? So I think these would be the three big themes that I'm expecting, and I guess most of the industry is expecting. Yeah.
Sure. So those who are watching this particular show, readers and the viewers, my small announcement here is, if you have any specific questions, feel free to share it with us. I will try and take best. I will try and take it with the panelists that you want, and try to get an answer for you. Kunal, slightly tweak the question from the budget expectations. Obviously, you share your budget expectations quickly, but I want you to also add, what path do you think the government will follow in the budget of 2025? Will they focus more on spending, or will they look at fiscal consolidation, fiscal prudence, considering, a lot of money has been already been distributed during the election?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, yeah. So the question is, I vote for both prudence plus spending. So how do you do that? The issue is, when you look at multiple elections that has happened and is going to happen, there's a clear sense of politically driven subsidy scheme that's going on. Now, I am a firm believer of giving the fishing net and not the fish. So the key idea should be to enable job generation, and that's where the budget focus should be. In fact, the recently released data, the FY25 first advance estimate, actually drives home the point I've been talking about. India is on the throes of a structural slowdown, not a cyclical slowdown that people are talking about. It's clearly structural. And at the heart of the slowdown lies weak job growth, and wages, even in fact, real rural wages have actually been contracting for the last 4 years. Only the past couple of months we are seeing some turnaround, but it's not a big deal. It's not a big improvement. Especially when you compare the fact that it has been contracting for 4 years, a slight improvement now still makes them worse off than they were, just before the pandemic. And even the household consumption expenditure survey for FY24 that was released, what it talks about is that there is a bridging of gap between urban and rural consumption. But what the
Right.
data reveals is that urban consumption has been slowing. And it's the
Hmm.
slowdown in urban consumption that's enabling the gap to be bridged. Not that
Hmm.
rural consumption is really running ahead. Yes, it's improving for sure, but it's not
Correct.
running ahead. So the challenge is how do we generate growth? And that's where I think a lot of focus ought to be in terms of the capex, so to say, in terms of I think the focus should also be on specifically MSMEs because they are the job
Hmm.
generators. And
Hmm.
how do we support them? So, including MSMEs in the PLI scheme of things. In
Hmm.
fact, one other issue that I would really like to put forward is we should have an urban employment guarantee scheme,
Hmm.
like the
Hmm.
rural employment guarantee scheme, possibly linked to the various municipalities in the big
Hmm.
cities. Because if
Hmm.
you look at city infrastructure, the public services, there are massive, deficit in terms of expectation and services on offer. So there are a lot that can be done. So
Correct.
maybe use that as a way to generate jobs. So those are things, capex for sure. So how do you manage capex? So that's always also very important because when the nominal GDP is slowing down, last
Yes.
2 years, the FY25 and FY24 nominal GDP growth is less than 10%. And this
Agree.
will be the lowest growth rate in more than 2 decades if you take away the two worst pandemic affected years. If the nominal GDP growth slows down, where does
Absolutely.
that leave your revenues to? So these are things that there has to be a deft management of expenditure, and how do you manage the subsidies? It shouldn't be an all-out handouts, so to say. We need to manage that because without capex, job generation still would remain a question. So one other thing I would like to say is, even MSME should be part of the PLIs. We should not
Yes.
restrict PLIs to big companies.
Correct.
That ensures that makes them unable to take advantage of the potential on offer. So there are multiple other things, but I would stop here, and maybe when we discuss further we can
Yes.
dwell
Yes.
on those.
Oh, obviously, I will. I will come back to you because the points that you have discussed are quite relevant one, and that's what I wanted. In fact, when you spoke specifically about 2 decades, I think the two data points which everyone should highlight now is the FDI and the FPI. It's 10-year low, and without that net FDI down, we cannot see the new without investments. We cannot see the capex of the private companies will also pick up, right? Which will ultimately not even boost the job. So I think a major challenges on that front, and if government can push something on that side, which will, what do you spur up the FDI and FPI will be really great. Consumption scheme, was one of the part of discussion that even Niranjani and Kunal said. So let me come to you, Ramesh, and give us some picture about consumption. When we are saying the consumption is down, boss, I'm spending a lot of money on Zepto. My teammates are ordering coffee on Zepto. I'm seeing the bikers of Zepto everywhere in the urban area. So what is happening with the consumption?
Yeah, thanks Amol for having me. And yeah, right as Kunal bhai said, in terms of job creation, and on that piece, right? If you look at quick commerce, it's an Indian innovation. Quick commerce has not worked anywhere in the world, so it's an Indian innovation working well for India, right? And it's a net job creator. It's a significant job creator. If I look at quick commerce of all as an industry together in next 3 to 5 years, this will be the highest job creator, bigger than Indian Railways probably. Right? So, in terms of job creation, it's a place where rural to urban mobility is happening. People are coming into formal economy, right, and it's adding to entire ecosystem benefit. So quick commerce has been a phenomenal journey in terms of last 18 odd months, where from why quick commerce to now why not and what all could happen there. So that's overall from from an budget expectation perspective, and this is startup in general, where I would look at GST as one area where we can really go deep. As you know, we are expanding meaningfully, and getting the registrations done for GST, right? It's not standardized. It is across very very different across the um, states, right? So what I would recommend, if we can have some ease of doing business on GST registration, where you can probably have an accreditation for the companies, right? If you are a category A, B, C, depending on the compliance history and the past, where you have to simplify the entire registration process standardize the registration process and make it seamless, probably a single click. So it's basically triple S, which is simplify, standardize, and make it a single click. So what happens with that is if we are expanding and growing, right, the more stores which are opened across the country, my ability to have jobs for a gig economy or picker packers, right, to fasten that up will significantly help, right? So today I see a lot of unstandard work happening across the states. So this is one area where ease of doing business can help. And then there's an area, if once I get into the business, right, any startup is innovating, right, and it's innovating on a business model or innovating on processes or technology, and there's a lot of upfront investments which a startup makes, and there is an accumulation of input tax credit which happens over time. And if you look at startups, they are always short of working capital. And the way to raise working capital is two parts, right? One, either you go to a bank or a lending company to raise, and a lot of times you don't get that right credit at the right interest rate. And the second piece is if you don't get working capital from a banking or financial institutions, then you go to the equity, right, in raising funds. And you know that's been extremely difficult market in the private segment to raise equity, and you have to dilute it. Either in India, domestic capital is even more difficult, and then you raise from outside. And as you mentioned, FDI has been significantly lower this year in general, right? Uh, so to that extent, where is that money? What can government do in terms of enabling this, right? If you look at one area, GST input tax credit, which is accumulated, it's a trapped cash for a startup. What if, like direct tax, where we have an assessment and then there's a refund of direct tax, which happen on an annual basis, we need to have some process where there's an assessment which happens on the GST piece, and there's a refund mechanism in terms of startups able to get those refund and then enable and unlock those working capital. That may
Right.
be one way. The innovation which can be brought, let's say the schemes don't change, the tax remains the same. There can be innovation of GST scripts, right? So if I have input tax credit, every 1 crore of input tax credit becomes a script, and government enables that in an exchange that I can buy or sell the GST scripts. If I have net input tax credit, I have a script number, I can sell it to somebody who has to make output tax credit, and it can be tradable scripts as well. So it can be another innovation which is specific to India, which could happen. So there are a lot more, but I'll stop here.
I
Amit.
think yeah, I think that's the best part of the CFOs. They talk from the bottom of the heart because since they deal with the finance and taxation, they have a lot of issues, and I think it's fair point that you raised. Thanks for adding that, Ramesh. Now let me come to Ramani. A very important question, madam. Where are the jobs? And that is what is going to be the theme all the time. In fact, last year the government accepted and realized that the job creation is a major problem, and they came with an internship scheme. But again, in the last 6 months, they could not reach to the scale, or did not come with a greater execution, though it was a good scheme. But what is it that you think, Ramani, that the government can do specifically to increase the jobs, which is a dire need of India right now?
So, Amol, I cannot answer this question in just 2 minutes. I'll take little longer because I believe India doesn't have a jobs problem. It's a wages problem. Anyone who is looking for a job at 5,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees can easily land it. But is that a living wage? Definitely no. So then how do we create more jobs at higher salaries, which meet the living costs of the people? So that's the challenge that the country is facing right now. And in fact, as you rightly mentioned, government has been trying multiple things over the last few years in terms of formalization of jobs or creation of more jobs. They identified that skilling is a challenge. Then they came up with NEP, internships, apprenticeships. There are multiple things, multiple moving parts, but I think the real problem is if I have to unpack that and summarize, saying that what are the five topmost initiatives that can help us to generate more jobs, I would go with industrialization, financialization, formalization, human capital, and urbanization. All these five are very important. So I can
Right.
talk about each of these 5 points in detail now, or in the subsequent points we can discuss. But all these five are equally important to create more formal jobs at.
Okay, I think that's a very, very important point. And when we look at even traditional companies, the way the wage or the wage hikes have been done with the senior management has not done with the lower management in the same proportion. And in fact, now at least people are vocal and they're talking about it, that the salaries are very low. And fortunately, the situation is such that a lot of people don't want to accept job offers, unless they're comfortable with the basic rulings of the payments. But thanks for adding that. Let me come to some specific questions to all of you. And friends, again, if you have any questions, please go ahead and shoot that. So Niranjani, when we speak about now ease of doing business specifically, what is it that perhaps you would like government to do in your segment? Because I'm sure you must be dealing with a lot of vendors, supply chain management, and a lot of taxation parts also. So what may be 2 to 3 points that you think the government should focus on so that the retail and FMCG get some seamless functions?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about not just tax, but touch upon the customs infrastructure. And I think there is a lot of work that one can do, especially for manufacturing companies who are importing and exporting, right? So the whole regime, the infrastructure, the ability to clear consignments, I think there's a lot of work and improvement that can happen. And coming from a working capital standpoint, we even today have to give a lot of bank guarantees, which is, holding back on our working capital cycle. So, is there a way to do away with some of these things, or to kind of release these bank guarantees faster so that we can kind of put back the working capital into business building? And even from a tariff standpoint, for example, if we don't have sufficient production of, say, a raw material like cocoa is a classic example, and we do a lot of cocoa, right? uh, Today we are having to kind of pay huge customs duties on shaped chocolates, whereas the bars are zero customs duties. So within chocolate itself there is so much of differentiation just because of the form of chocolate, which does not make a lot of sense. So there
Right.
are these kind of nuances which I think one can really go into much deeper, and I think it will be a big unlock for manufacturing and FMCG companies if these things get kind of get taken care, and we can become top 10. I mean, today we are whatever 63 out of our 190 economies from the World Bank survey, right? So, I mean, there's still a long, long way for us to be the most favored, or at least the top 10 in terms of ease of doing business.
Yeah, certainly. Aniket, let me also bring you here, though you highlighted a couple of points. But specifically again, because government perhaps cannot go for those archaic laws, they're still there. They will have to again go back and perhaps look at it and how to perhaps abolish them. But considering the path of Vikasit Bharat and considering we are going to be a trillions dollar economy, or the third largest economy very soon, what is it that you think the government should specifically do now so that the foreign companies will not find challenges coming in here, the Indian companies will not find challenges in growing and planning their expansions?
So I think I'll just maybe take 4 or 5 minutes to take this in a little bit of a detail, because I think viewers will appreciate this, and I would like to be a little more specific on this. And I think you raise it from a very important perspective. A foreign investor coming in, I think Ramesh Bhai very rightly gave an example, and I think these are real issues, Amolji, which I feel need to be discussed. I think it's not just the laws. I think the government, in its intent, has done a lot of things to bring in newer laws. We have the IBC today, which was never there earlier, and I think that's made insolvency easier. They've made so many changes to laws, they've removed so many laws. I think where the challenge is, and where I think many of us have to realize, and I hope the government realizes, is actually the implementation and the sheer bureaucratic approach in a lot of these acts. I think GST, for example, it's a wonderful thing. You may have merged all these acts, subsumed them, and brought it into one. I think it's a miracle for business. But then today, when you expect to get a registration, and then every state enforces a different form of law for you to register. You want to register today in a state like Gujarat, you will have people who will come and take your bioprint on a fingerprint. You will have people who come and take a picture of you at your premise and will want you to stand behind what is going to be your board. I think, well, we all understand there have been scams for GST. Nobody in this, in this room, the virtual room, or who's hearing is anyway supportive of people doing bogus billing. I think we have to call them out. I think that's not supported. But just because you had a few people who ran a scam of bogus bills and gave GST credits, can you put every single business owner who wants to set up a business through the test of an officer coming to his premise? I think it's the most intrusive thing in your life to have some government officer come into your office and take a picture and take your biometrics. But that's the reality of today. I think, therefore, what is important in my view is not laws or rules getting changed, but the mindset of bureaucratic approach, which is somewhere crept in, that has to be unshackled. I think I don't say we go back to the 15-year ago age where you could walk in any lane, drive in any lane, and nothing would happen. People would say you'll never get arrested, you'll never get caught, you'll never have any consequences. I think that coming in, the strictness of laws we all appreciate. But at the same time, you cannot implement every rule in a very bureaucratic single fashion. I'll give you another example, Amolji. Today, when you talked about a foreign incorporating company wanting to come and start a business in India, how difficult is it today to set up an LLP and get a name approved for a company registration? It's extremely difficult today. There are challenges, there are issues. You compare that with anywhere in the West, I think it's a lot easier. It had got better at some point, but I think over the past few years, and again, I think there have been some companies, we all read about the Chinese companies which came and took away money. There was some, but I think just because a few did wrong, can you then make everybody who's starting anew, creating a company, go through that process? So I think to answer that in terms of the EODB and making it attractive for foreign investment, I think it's not the laws. I don't think it's the rules. I think we've done enough in these years to bring in the Insolvency Act, the GST laws, so many other laws that have been removed. I think it is the implementation. Somewhere the entire bureaucracy and the mechanism which implements these laws have to learn one simple word, and that is empathy. Have respect for the business owner, have respect for the person who's starting up, trying to create the employment. Your questions today, Amolji, evolved around creating employment. And I think till the bureaucratic process doesn't respect the employer who's putting his risk capital, who's putting his time and trying to create a business, and in the process creating employment, I think he deserves much more respect. And I think he also deserves that much more leeway and ease of doing business, for anything starting from incorporation to GST registrations to labor law compliances. And there's so much more that I can talk about as a chartered accountant. But I think, yes, that would be amazing. And I think on PLIs, I can specifically mention, because Kunalji touched upon this, I think it has been a great success. But now it may be a good time for the government to start thinking, can I bring it down to the smaller businesses? I think the larger business houses have greatly benefited from it. And the MSMEs, or the medium and small enterprises, if they become a part of this story, I think only if you bring manufacturing in. Yes, GCCs is a great story. I think Ramani will second me on that. Those are creating employments that we need. But is that going to suffice for a country of 140 crore? Probably not. And I think till we don't get manufacturing, till we don't encourage manufacturing, and till the time we don't back the new industrialist who's putting his risk capital, I think that's what, in my view, is needed. Remove the bureaucratic approach, unshackle the promoter and the entrepreneur, and I think you will see a lot of those objectives that you spoke about being met.
Certainly. Detail one, Aniket, thanks for adding that. Kunalji, एक important question that सबके दिमाग में अभी एक जो है, and I was actually talking to a lot of people, and everybody says कि what is it that going wrong that the foreign investors are not coming? Okay, when you're talking about कि India बहुत ज़्यादा grow हो रहा है, so foreign investments नहीं आ रहे हैं. I'm talking about specifically FDI, not the market where, which is quite temporary. So the FDI is not coming in India, but the India's FDI, which is outflow, is increasing. In last 1 to 2 years, Indians have invested lots of money outside. So what is going wrong here? What is the mismatch here? And whether there is any way that we can correct it? In fact, somebody has also asked a similar question in the chat window. Kunalji, if you can go ahead with it. You're on mute. If you could unmute.
Of course. Yeah.
Yes.
So Aniket ji and Niranjana ji actually touched upon my pet peeve in terms of improving business sentiment. Talking of GST, talking of import, the challenges in terms of tariffs, and also those are the kind of barriers that we have set up. And I think this lies at the heart of why FDI is not where it should be. Is that India's business sentiment is still worrisome, and people would possibly think multiple times before setting up shop here, and which is where these needs to be taken care of. So a few of those things have been touched upon by esteemed panelists, but there are also many other things that could be done. One is in terms of judicial reforms. People do get caught up in legal issues, and there's no specific timeline in how soon it can be solved, and unless we have some sense of surety in terms of whether you get into when you get into it, whether you'll get out of it within the time frame. So how does that your business model evolve? So you plan for something and something happens, then your business model goes for a toss. So these are things we need to look at. What we also do need to look at is spending a lot more on health and education. The average quality of India's workforce is quite inadequate. We still have a situation where virtually 90% of Indian graduates are unemployable. Now, if a foreign investor wants to come into India, why would they invest in this country where they still see a large number of people? There's a huge amount of population. We are a young country, yet we do not get the right kind of skills that we require. So how do we do that? We have been talking about it, and there's no rocket science. You just need to have more public investment in health and education, and we actually lag a lot behind those. So,
Right.
so the other thing, in terms of people willing to work, in terms of labor force participation rate, why is it so low? Why is female labor force participation rate so low? In fact, in India's participation rate is weaker than that of Saudi Arabia. So why do we have that? How do we create enabling environment, where we can get more people? I mean, at this stage of our demography and growth, we cannot have a situation where our labor force participation rate is around 40-50%, maybe a little less than that, where it should be above 60%. So lot more things needs to be talked about and done in this thing. Even in terms of policy announcements, so we talked of employment linked incentive scheme, so ELI, so to say. So there's a big challenge between announcements and implementation that Aniket ji has talked about. So
So yes,
announcements are fine.
one side job creation is a problem, but on the other side, the population, unemployable population, is also a major issue
Rising.
that
Yes, absolutely,
point that
absolutely.
Kunal raised. So, okay, so I'm also taking in between some questions from the audience. So there is one question specifically on the startup side, and Ramesh, if you could, add that you already highlighted a couple of pain points. This question specifically is a lot of startups have closed down in last 1 year. What can since I mean, and this is an important question because this person is asking, what can government do to revive the startup? The government has been talking a lot about digital India and startup India, but in reality, the number of startups are actually closing down. So what can we do, Ramesh, if you want to add a couple of thoughts there?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of these startups closing down, can be multiple. It can be a business model problem, but I'm leaving that aside, right? What can government do is on the policy side, it's like the sword which is hanging, right? It's a sword of Damocles, right? Sorry about that. So, in terms of giving clarity of regulation, giving confidence in the regulation, and being having the right commitment. So, it's
Yeah.
clarity, confidence, and commitment, which is given to the investor base, saying that if you invest in startups or in India, right, you are getting this. Today, the regulations are hanging swords. It's become a dangerous thing to talk about, and the risk factors on investments become significantly high and unattractive as a country, right? So, from a government perspective, there are a lot of initiatives in Startup India and all of those pieces. But I think having on the regulatory side the mindset in terms of growth mindset and ability to give clarity, confidence, and commitment, I would think that's the number one factor, right? And I'll tell you about the mindset a little more deeper here. if you look at GST or any other law, there is a entrapment principle, right? कि company चोर है, let them happen and I'll entrap them, right? In terms of the compliance, right? Instead of that mindset of entrapment, can I have an assisted compliance, right? So compliance ka sati instead of compliance ka lathi. So I'll give you an example where e-way bills. E-way bill is when goods move from one location to other locations, and the government today has a lot of sophistication to figure out whether the goods have really moved or not, and that's thanks to that they have got a lot of fake invoices and those things. So what can happen where government look at there's an fast tag, right? So if you move from location A to location B, it moves via some fast tag mechanism. If you enable the APIs for company like us, I'm the CFO, I have internal audit committee and the board to report to. Today, 2A and 2P is a fantastic mechanism, right? There's a reconciliation that happens. But if you can red flag the transactions which were not accurate, right? This becomes an assisted compliance. And then I can, as a finance leader, can look at all the points where there were red flags. So it becomes compliance ka sati, and I'm working with the government, looking at the API, looking at millions of transactions which are happening in my company, and then I report to the board and the investors and audit committee. I think the mindset should move away from entrapment to assistance. So I
Sure.
think those are the 2 points I would say.
So Ramani, you spoke about the wage as one of the important factor, and Kunal also spoke about the unemployable. Uh, if we have to match, these two aspects, what is actually going wrong? Do you think that the corporate India is still not ready to accept the fact that we need to increase the wages? That is one. And on the second side, people are perhaps believing, the youngsters or the Gen Z or even some part of millennials are, so you think that's still believing more on the chat GPT and the AI, and think that, the AI will do the work. I do not need to learn. So what is going wrong on that side, on both the sides, Raman?
So, Amol, regarding the wages, I don't blame corporate India, because the biggest challenge corporate India is facing is on productivity. The point which Kunal also touched upon, saying that the skill set, there is a huge gap in the skill set of the people. Even though we are churning millions of, job seekers every year, they're actually not job ready. And companies are investing a lot in training these talent in the initial years, and they're not able to retain. So if you ask the employers, they have their own their own complete list of challenges on the salaries, productivity, people retention, all of that. So again, taking a step back, one of my favorite quotes is that there are no poor people, but only poor places. Like a waiter in New York earns more than a waiter in Bangalore. Maybe the person in Bangalore may have better hospitality skills, but still, since that person is living in New York, he is earning more. Same way, a software engineer in Bangalore is earning more than a software engineer maybe working in Lucknow or some other tier 2 place. So urbanization is a very important element for us to increase the wages. So the smart city project which the government is working on is really good, but we need more momentum. So the infrastructure spending, more employment centers getting generated in more number of cities with more urbanization is extremely important. Secondly is all about industrialization. Again, one of the panelists have mentioned that our job penetration in manufacturing sector is very less. It's hardly like 11%, 12%. And in a country like ours with huge population, we have to take that percentage to at least 25, 30%. And for that, maybe Make in India, PLI schemes to some extent that's helping. But the biggest lever would be the third point, which is the financialization. How do we get more access to capital to set up more industries in the country, the equity access or debt access? So that's extremely important. So, and to address that, the challenges which Aniket mentioned are very important because one of the biggest challenge in the country in growing a business, setting up a business and growing a business is not having ease of doing business, right? There are various challenges at all levels, especially in terms of meeting the compliances. The cost of compliances is so high in this country, and that has become one of the biggest roadblock. Fourth one is on formalization. While there are jobs getting created, majority of them are going into informal sectors. What I mean as informal sector is where the employees are not getting social security benefits like a provident fund, insurance coverage, or maybe able to get a home loan or a vehicle loan. So these are the things which are really impacting, right? And the last but not the least, human capital, because as I mentioned earlier, there is a huge shortage on the required skills for us to get more people enter into the job market, into formal jobs. So there has to be initiatives in terms of education policies, apprenticeships, more amount of trainings, internships. So and in fact, we are expecting a lot from this budget, especially around the skill gap and more formal employment generation.
Yeah, I think that was again a detailed one and very meaningful, Ramani. I think again everything there is a nexus. I mean, it's everything is connected. While we are talking about the job creation and the new people and everything, well, the corporate India is complaining that okay, the ease of doing business is not there. I am facing a lot of challenges, perhaps, and the cost is going up. So one point I think I have for you, Nilanjani, specifically on the compliance part. In last couple of months, every CFO I spoke to has been talking about the compliance. The biggest challenge, the biggest burden is the compliance. Apart from what Aniket and in fact Ramesh spoke, specifically GST or maybe registrations and the vendor, anything specific that you think will help corporate India or India Inc. a lot in terms of in terms of ease of doing business, or if there is a business seamless, if you can share something.
Sure, Mal. I think one other area is, I think overall from a taxation perspective, it's looked at as a high risk area by any MNC. Anyone who wants to invest in India always looks at our taxation regime as not being very stable or predictable, right? I think if we can kind of shift that image that we have currently in the global landscape to try and make it more welcoming, be an enabler, like Aniket mentioned, it's not just a regulator, but being like an enabler for the larger global community, I think we would do ourselves a lot of service, because I'm sure a lot of people looking at our demographic dividends want to invest into India. But I think one thing that's coming in the way is just the imagery that we have, and the imagery exists because of different instances when people have really burned their fingers in multiple cases. And even from a corporate rate standpoint, right? Like for Singapore, for example, they are sitting at say 17% as their corporate rate. We're still much higher than that, 25-30%. So is there ways to kind of relook at some of these things and really make India very meaningful for the global investing community? I think that's something, there's really some work to be done there.
Certainly, I think noted your points. I think I have one more question specifically on the China part, and any one of you can answer. We always compare India with China. We had this Atmanirbhar schemes for a couple of years, but last year the economic survey suggested that India should look at Chinese FDI far more seriously. The government has not given much clarifications there yet, but now there are reports that Indian government should allow Chinese FDI and everything. So one question: how India should look at China, and whether FDI from China should be allowed. What should be government China plus strategy? What should be the relations between India and China? Anybody wants to answer this part, because China is going to be the always interesting story, and India is an emerging country, developing country. So this is an important aspect.
Yeah, I think I'll just give maybe my 2 cents on this very quickly. And I think, Amol, you raise a very important point. In today's world, when we are talking about, for example, getting into the semiconductor business, we have to accept one fact that, yes, it will be a +1 strategy for a lot of nations who are looking at diversifying their supply chain. But at the same time, if you want to have a successful semiconductor manufacturing here, a lot of the talent and a lot of the equipment is going to come from China. So you will need collaboration. Now, I'm not going to talk about the political aspect of it, because I think it's for the government of the day to decide how you see the relations country to country. But squarely from an economic point of view, I think you cannot simply ignore the fastest economy in our region, our neighbor, and more importantly, the manufacturing hub of the world. I definitely feel if it was to be only just on the economic principle, you need to open those FDI doors. It's been a very, very harsh last few years, Amolji, let me tell you, especially as a professional, and I talk about this as a chartered accountant, we had more than 350 chartered accountants and company secretaries who were pulled up saying, why did you incorporate a company? Because at some point, the equity owner of those companies were Chinese owners. And these people had to go through criminal investigations, through professional investigations. And this happened because India's political relation with China, I think, changed. And I think I go back to what Niranjani ji said. You cannot have laws of economics change just because of a changed political situation. I think that somewhere we all have to appreciate and accept. Look at what happened to the online gaming industry. Now, do I subscribe or anybody here subscribes to gambling? Absolutely not. Do we want our youth to get into it? No. But by just putting a tax there and creating such a confusion in GST, so many investments have gone down the drain. So many startups have actually left the business. And therefore, I think when you need policy consistency, I think there has to be accountability when you are implementing this. Just to waking up one day and saying, no, the whole gaming industry will have to suffer because of a change in law. I think that tweak is not good. So I think consistency. And second, on the China front, I have no doubt in my mind when you ask me this question, Amolji, we need that investment. If we have to go from where we are at 3.5 trillion to 5, 10, and maybe even 35 trillion by 2047, it has to come with collaboration from China, from US, and from so many countries. And I think the government, I think the onus is there. As a professional, I'll be very scared today if there's a Chinese company coming and setting up its office or manufacturing in India. I'll be extremely skeptical in consulting them and coming here because I don't want to then be pulled up and saying, why did you pull up? So I think that messaging, along with opening the FDI, should be very clear from the government, where you allow the business owners and the professionals to then solicit this kind of work and bring in this investment. Or else, I think one more border tiff, and things may change. Investments are planned, and everything goes for a toss. I think that's something that we must avoid. And I would only hope that whatever comes out, if the FDI, for example, is to be opened up, is to be allowed from China, let that be a long-term thought. If they want to take a little longer, they can. But it should be something which is very clear, because I think one thing that the businesses want before making that investment decision to go into India is what is going to be the long-term policy. And I think there is where the heart of this question lies. Thank you.
Certainly.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely in line with what he's saying. The fact is, no is not an answer. We have to find ways of making sure there are adequate checks and balances. But saying no is definitely not an answer. Just as much as China needs India, India too needs China. China plus one strategy, India is a beneficiary for sure, but India is not the sole beneficiary. So there are multiple competitors also out there in this hemisphere, in the other hemisphere as well. So how do we look into it? If you're talking of EV, can we do without China? If we talk of solar panels, can we do without China? We need to collaborate with them. We should have adequate checks and balances in place. We need to think through it. You don't have to come up with a policy now or the next week or the next month. Think through it, have a long-term policy, but then it becomes non-negotiable. A change in political situation cannot change business situation, because that is also where the heart lies at the heart of ease of business and the challenges of doing business in India. We need to be very mindful of that.
Absolutely. So there is one more important question, and Ramani, I would like you to take that. Somebody has asked this. So we spoke about the job, the wages, and the unemployable part also. But when we speak about the skill gap, what can be done? That is the question somebody has asked. How can government actually ensure that the skill gap is met? How can we build bridge there?
Hey, Amul. So, regarding bridging the skill gap, it has to start from the education policy itself in terms of the curriculum, be it at school level, college level, degree level, across all levels. And after that, how are we making these kids job ready? Can we do with internships, apprenticeships? Definitely yes, because we have already seen that working very beautifully in our own profession, in chartered accountancy or lawyers and other professions where there is internship as a program mandated. We have seen that those professionals are much more productive. So we have seen government taking initiatives in that direction. They're now talking about internships. There is already an apprenticeship program, but it's not a great success for different reasons. Now they are trying with internship, which is a good initiative, but they have to come up with a clear policy. I give you one example. Under apprenticeship, they came up with one notification called NEEM, National Employability Enhancement Mission. And
Right.
we did very well on that scheme, and we managed to onboard close to 85,000 trainees as apprentices under that scheme with 500 plus clients. And one fine day, they have withdrawn that scheme and said that all of these kids have to be let go from the apprenticeship programs, because there were some service providers who were misusing this scheme. Like, they're using this as an alternative to cheap labor. Instead of hiring them as employees, they hired these people as trainees, but
Hmm.
they're not paying them, say, provident fund benefits or insurance benefits, all of that, which otherwise as employees they would be eligible. So instead of addressing that one deviation, that one violation, they have altogether withdrawn the program. So our concern is, with the new internship scheme that they're talking about, they shouldn't be doing that. They have to be very clear on what are the set of rules, how is it applicable, how will it be governed, what are the specific areas where they are expecting corporates to train these job seekers, and after training what happens, like, is there any minimum percentage that has to be absorbed by the corporates? So we need more clarity on these things. So we want the implementation of the upskilling, internship, apprenticeship being more rule based instead of leaving it to interpretations. Keep it more rule based, govern it with a proper digital infrastructure. Because if I take the current scheme of labor laws, many of them are managed physically. There are very few digitally managed compliances as far as labor laws are concerned. So at least with more of digital infrastructure in managing the apprenticeships and internships, we believe that there can be greater accountability and greater productivity that we can derive from the kids.
Sure, I think that's a very,
Can I
very
add one more
good
point
thought.
here as she has
Sure,
talking about?
Kunal.
I think there should be greater emphasis on academia industry collaboration. It is
Right.
there, but a lot can be done. I mean, South Korea is a great example of what these people are doing. Every year when the government draws up their focus technology area, the universities modify their syllabus accordingly, and
Hmm.
the students who come in, they actually get trained in the next set of focus
Hmm.
areas for all the engineers who would
Hmm.
be studying engineering as a subject. So the point is there should be a stronger collaboration between academia, industry, and government. Set up a roadmap and ensure that people do get trained adequately for the next levels. I think that's crucial as well.
Sure. So, Niranjani, one more question I have specifically is, I'm sure you must be talking to your global counterparts also. You must be looking at other countries. Uh, what is it that, as a CFO, that you think is missing now when we are talking about huge capex plans? Because again, if you look at the private companies, nobody's expanding heavily, which they thought of they will do. Uh, the reasons are unknown to us. Fortunately, government and the banks are ready to fund them, but they don't want to borrow money and go for a huge capex. What is missing? As a CFO, you have been a veteran CFO working since a really long time. I
I
mean,
think
so much
wonderful question,
macro
Amol.
factors are good, but what is missing? Yes, please go ahead.
No, I think a very good question. Let me try and break this, and maybe the other panelists can add. If you kind of look at our consumption right now for the last few years, it's been a little bit wobbly, right, versus how it used to be before. And
Hmm.
I think rural still is like 35-40% of our FMCG consumption, and I mean right now they're growing around 6%. Earlier it was 5. It's kind of inching up. And that's also happening because we had elections, we had some kind of investments going in that rural space, and that's what has triggered this. Now if you look at the differentiation between the urban and rural consumers, today urban is consuming way ahead, which is roughly like say 7,000 rupees per person, versus this is 4,000 roughly, right? So there's already a divide between these. So if we kind of really put our machinery in terms of distribution infrastructure, putting affordable products, right kind of products and the right kind of price to the consumer, I think there is a lot of headroom to grow. And I think
Hmm.
really we need to go back. And when I said really all of us, it's not just the government's job. It's as much the India Inc. and everyone in the economists. Everyone needs to kind of hold hands to make this work, because there is a lot of India is an unserved country. It's not completely, it's underserved. Right? There's so much to be consumed, and there is a lot of aspirational products to be bought and experienced between, especially with the lower income group. But price sensitivity kind of comes in way, right? So we need to kind of get government help in that sense to look at how do we, maybe through the GST regime itself, to try and see how we can expand the tax base, but kind of give them better disposable income in the hands. I think if we kind of crack this consumption problem or consumption, I wouldn't say it's a problem, it can get definitely better. And once that happens, I think everything falls in place. It becomes a virtuous cycle, right? Because once consumption comes in, what would companies do? Definitely they'll be investing more capex and more capacity into serving this. And they'll kind of bring more innovative products. They'll kind of bring next level of grade of products. So it'll become a virtuous cycle. And I think one other point I'd like to say here is, between today we're talking about traditional trade and quick commerce as two separate boxes. I think that kind of divide will also go away, because even traditional trade will need to get digital at some stage, right? Because they cannot currently continue the way they're continuing, because they'll get taken over. So as quick commerce grows rapidly, I think that will also bring a step jump into improving consumption. And as scale picks up for them, all these startups and everyone, so their unit economics will start to play up more positively. I think then we completely get into this virtuous cycle of better consumption, improved products, innovative products coming in, more disposable income and better servicing and more capacity, and some of these PLIs and others can kind of come. So that's how I see this complete circle emerging, and I think that's what most successful economies have really done. So we have all of it. We have the demographic dividends, we have the digital infrastructure getting better, we have the intent, and the government is pro industry. So a lot of things, positives around us to really leverage and step up our game.
Ramesh, I want you also to add in terms of the missing part.
See, like Linear said, right? From a capex perspective, we are doing significant capex, right? We're growing multiple. I've done more than 1,000 crores of capex this year, and see what requires is, like I mentioned before, is clarity, confidence, and commitment in the policies, right? The moment I do such deep uh, capex across the country, right, and then in terms of not having the confidence on the regulation or the commitment for the long time on regulation, that kind of brings risk averse or high risk zone, right, and it becomes unattractive. I think what we are creating is a hyperlocal distribution platform. So anybody, any brand today, a D2C brand, a micro entrepreneur can join and sell on quick commerce, and they get the distribution on day one, uh, right? And hence those capex are done today. There are a lot of startups who are doing capex, but in terms of having the regulatory commitment for a long time, I think that will be the meaningful step forward.
Certainly, I think those were valuable thoughts and points. I think there were a couple of questions which I did not take because we had partly discussed them, and a lot of things have been covered. I had a couple of more questions, but the time is actually up. But thank you so much. I must say it was a really meaningful conversation, and all of you shared really, I mean, extremely relevant thoughts. Let's continue this tempo, and let's wait that finance minister, if not everything, at least cover a couple of points that we discussed here in the budget, which is going to be there after 21 days. So thank you so much, Aniket, Kunal, Niranjani, Ramesh, and Ramani, for sharing those relevant and meaningful thoughts on the ETCFO platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.